Hey, guys, it is me, Cassie. Welcome into the first episode of the Blueprint Lounge. Come right on in, grab a seat and let's dive into the first episode. I think I went back and forth for a very long time trying to figure out like what I initially was going to talk about, whether or not I was going to jump in and let you guys get to know me, the why behind this and the that and all this other stuff. And something hit me. Something close to home, something that I worked on and actually wrote an article about. And I really thought it would be beneficial to talk about. And I thought it really hit home, and that's how I felt. So, in this episode, I'm going to talk about an article that I did called Raising My Black Son in a World Who Doesn't See Him. And you can find out all, you can go and read that article over on Substack. I'll make sure to leave all the information below. But let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to drink a little bit of water real quick. And I got my phone here for notes. But I want to say that article I had dropped, I want to say maybe a week ago. And prior to that, the way that it came about was on a car ride home. I was looking at my son. It was just me and him. And we were sitting in traffic, right? And so, I was looking at him and I'm just like, wow, look at this young man. You know what I mean? And then I had, these flashback moments of all the worry, the fear, and things like that we experience as parents, right? How you don't want to see your child get harmed or things like that, right? We go through that, and that's everyone goes through that, right? So we understand that, at certain stages in life, we have to start preparing them for adulthood, right? And I think for me, there's a lot of fear that comes in now, especially because my son, he's 15. He is Black, and being raised in this world that can be so cruel. I always say, us as humans, we can be some very ugly creatures, needless to say, but being born in a world that does not see you, it hurts. It's a struggle. And I think overall, no matter what race you are, there's always going to be bad seeds. It doesn't matter, right? But again, watching him grow up and seeing him, looking over at him in the car in that moment, a lot of fear ran through my mind, a lot of questions ran through my head at that time. Am I doing enough, raising him, in a world that clearly can be very, very cruel to people who are not from a particular race. And it's unfortunate, but that's the way society is. And, it's been that way from the beginning. It does not seem like it's going to change. And as we keep going on, it just seems like things sometimes just seem worse than times before, right? But those were some of the things that ran through my mind, just asking myself if I was doing enough, if I really have set him up in a way that he would be able to take care of himself, enjoy life, and live for a very long time, right? Um, but those fears start coming in just given the nature of society, you know. It made me sit back and think about the beginning, right? Me, when I found out that I was pregnant, in that moment, you know, I was riddled with a lot of fear. I became very, very depressed in that moment. It was so bad that I had even thought about not going through with the pregnancy due to how society is and how ugly the world is. And for someone to sit back and not be able to fully enjoy a pregnancy that should be one of the most joyous times, you know, in someone's life, um, sh- goes to show how much growing we have to do as human beings. Okay. Um, but to take you guys back to where I was 15 years ago. Damn, I'm old. Yeah, so, you know, taking you back 15 years ago when I did find out that I was pregnant. Um, I'ma just be honest, you know, I was in one of the worst mental headspace that I could be in. I was someone who was riddled with so many, you know, so much so much insecurities, so many insecurities, um, bad mental headspace, emotionally in a bad place. Life, if the word lifing was going on back then, life was lifing. Um, but it was more of a traumatizing moment for me than a joyous one. And it was because of a multitude of reasons. One of the biggest ones being the fact that I knew, even before they told me, I knew I was having a boy just based upon his father and what his father produced. And, you know, so I knew it. But then, you know, I also knew that I would be responsible for raising this young black male in a world that does not see him the way that I would see him or people close to him would see him. They would be more, you know, fearful of him because of the color of his skin. And then also because I was going to be doing it alone. I knew that his father and I was not going to last very long at all. But, you know, in that moment, I did, you know, go through a deep depression. I had even thought about ending, you know, the pregnancy. And this is before I found out for sure that I was having a boy. But, you know, just in my mind, thinking to myself, like, bringing another child in a world that's so fucked up. I'm sorry. Like, I was just in that space where I couldn't even figure out why anyone would want to have a child, you know, in this world. Um, let alone, you know, especially if someone from the a black community. Why would you want to bring a child in this world that is so jacked up? It's jacked up from, you know, the aspects of all the racism that goes on to our own people, you know, battling with each other. So, you know, I was struggling really bad, and I had thought about ending that pregnancy. But I also knew that I did not want to go down that road of having another abortion. I did not want to not only subject myself to the emotional and mental toll that an abortion can have on you, but I also did not want to keep running from choices that I've made. And I just said to myself, I was like, you know what? Nope, we're going to do this. We got this. Because at that time, I felt like I had a strong, foundation when it came to, my family. And fast forward a little bit, finding out sex of the baby, it's a boy. That's what I found out. Um, I don't think I had any kind of emotions when I did find out. I think I was really numb to it. I think I was more focused on trying to figure out what I was going to do. Because at this time, I was actually living down in Georgia, so I was away from family, for one. And then there was an extreme amount of pressure on me because of my situation and the relationship I had with his father at that time. Like, all of it was just looking bad altogether. But definitely when you're so far away from your family, everybody is in Maryland, but you're living in Georgia and you don't have the proper support there in Georgia. And you're thinking to yourself, like, how are you going to do this? How are you going to raise him? Are you going to be able to do this? So all those things, came to mind. And it was just a very, very dark place for me. And to top everything off, things were just falling apart left and right. And my mom was really, really sick. She had cancer. And I had got the phone call from my sister that, we needed to come back up. And in that moment, I needed to come back for various reasons, anyways. And one being that I just had my son. I was losing everything. I had lost my car. I didn't know how I was going to be able to continue to, maneuver and stuff like that. Like I said, didn't have the greatest support system when living down in Georgia. And when I got that phone call, trying to scramble to figure out how I was going to get a newborn, myself and my young daughter, back up to Maryland to make sure I got back up here, because I really didn't know how bad it was with my mom. But, lo and behold, long story short, is, one of the biggest foundational pieces that I felt like I end up losing approximately 14 days after my son was born. And yeah, in that moment, it was hard. And I was filled with so many negative emotions at that time. And being up here with a newborn, family member, you put on that smile. Everybody's like, oh, it's baby and all this. And they're the most precious things ever. Like, don't get me wrong, babies are the most precious things ever. And, I would put that smile on my face and stuff like that. But on the inside, like, fear was tearing me up. And it was fear on so many different levels, but, I did have some joyous moments out of watching him grow up, him becoming the young man that he is now. But I think my fear robbed him of his childhood, because there were certain things that I didn't allow for him to do. And one of those examples is, the Nerf guns and the water guns and stuff like that. Now, don't get me wrong, he did have a Nerf gun, and things like that, but I refused to allow for him to go outside to play with them. It was that whole fear based upon how society was moving in, during that time. You heard, about the Trayvon Martin and playing with a toy gun, and how the police officers, killed him. And so that fear stuck with me. And I refused to allow for him to go out and play with the other kids, in the neighborhood, if they were playing with, like wanting to play with the Nerf guns with him and stuff like I refused to let him go outside and do that. That was like a no, not having it. So I think a lot of my fear robbed him of being able to be a true kid, and it sucks because that's how society has made it. And as time went on, you know, it got to a point where the relationship with his father and I dissolved, just like I knew. It dissolved. We went our separate ways. Still, kept in contact. The co-parenting between us is pretty good. And you try to just maneuver the best way you can in those moments. But then I start feeling a lot more pressure, a lot more weight on my shoulder, because now in my mind, I thought I was going to have to raise this, this young boy all on my own. And of course, you always have people tell you, if you need help, you need this, whatever, just reach out, stuff like that. And to be honest, it's not always like that. And I don't care what anybody say. It's not always like that. People say it because it sounds good. But him getting into elementary school and going through elementary school, things were okay. He was learning, he was getting through, he was excited about school, and then we had another blow. We end up losing my dad in 2017. And, my son found him. And I think that was the turning point, because it kind of devastated my son, because my dad and him were like this. And it's not that he found him dead, or unalive. I don't, whatever term you guys use now. It wasn't that, it was just that he found my dad slumped over in the bathroom. And you got to remember, at this time, my son is like 7. He's used to getting off the school bus, meeting grandpa on the porch, and and grandpa waiting for him. And this day, it wasn't that way. And long story, short, we end up losing my dad. And I think in that moment is when things started turning for my son, where he started having like behavioral issues in school and stuff like that. And now I knew that I was starting to really get into the thick of things with him, and trying to maneuver those behavioral issues and stuff like that. And going through all of that, I had to even let the school know that, how much involved I was in his education and him being respectful while he was in school. And I would tell them all the time, like, look, don't hesitate to call me. Don't hesitate to, email me, whatever it is, if he's not doing what he's supposed to do. And me trying to also navigate, trying to help him, process through those emotions and stuff like that. So, he went to therapy. We even had him in karate to work out some of that frustration and anger that he was, feeling. But all in all, like, ultimately, with all of that and me being very present about him in school, I even had to tell the school, like, if he's being disrespectful, you know, this is what I'm giving you permission to do, because I told them straight up I refuse to allow for him to show up and be disrespectful, because of the simple fact that he is a black boy, and this is going to, if he continues on with that behavior, it was going to hinder him even more, especially out here in society, right? So I have had this struggle with him, in when he was in 5th, 6th grade, and well, 4th through 6th, and then when he got into middle school, still navigating some of those pent up emotions and feelings. But now he's a teenager, so them, gosh, like, even when we were teenagers, our hormones were all over the place, emotions, trying to figure out stuff and all of that, right? But the fear has never left me. And again, I think I robbed him of a lot, because a lot of the lessons that I was teaching him came from a fear-based mindset. And for any of you guys out there, especially if you're doing it by yourself, ladies, I cannot express it enough that though the fear is real and the fear is there, we have to be very, very careful about the lessons that we're teaching them, because sometimes it's like we're robbing them of precious moments. And I understand why we do it, and I get it. And it's hard to even try to figure out how to balance that when you're living in a society that looks at us as if we're trash, or if like we're non-existent, or we don't matter and stuff, right? So going through that, ladies, just keep that in mind, because I think we internalize things a lot different than what a single dad would probably do. So I'm not leaving you out of the equation. However, I can only speak from a female perspective in being a single mother and raising, my son. And, that's just one of the things that I notice, right? Is that I feel like I robbed him of a lot of his childhood because of the fear that society has set in on how we move, So some of those things could be like, I know I taught both, like I talk to both of my kids, like when we go out just simply to shop, or we're in a store or whatever, I tell them often, like, don't bring that in, especially because I know they sell it there. Don't bring it in, because they're going to think something else if they see it on you, right? And I don't do it myself. Like, I legit will stand there and take things out of my purse that I know that might be sold in that store, just because I don't want any problems at all. And it's not saying that I'm going in there and something or a problem's going to happen. But for me, I'd rather be proactive than reactive, right? And it sucks that, you I think that way. That's just me. I'm not saying that everybody does, but that's just me. So like one of the things with him is that he loves wearing his headphones, and I had to teach him about leaving that stuff in the car, because he's a little bit more independent now. He likes going off by himself, and I allow for him to do that. He's into electronics and stuff, so he'll go and look at certain things because he always wants the, headphones that's going to play the bass and all that. But like I was telling him, with him walking around with it, and if he's not around me, then someone in the store could possibly, judge him and mislabel him and think that he probably stole, those headphones, right? And like I said, I like to be more proactive than reactive. I rather you not go in there with any of it so they don't have anything to say, right? Even down to the hoodies. He loves wearing hoodies, right? So do I. But I had to explain to him, like, don't have your hood on. Like, don't do that, because this is what they're going to think. This is what they, possibly are going to do, right? So it's like, you go into stores, you go out in public, the things that you do, I'm always constantly on 1,000, because I just don't want any trouble at all. I don't want anybody to have anything to say. So working out of that fear mindset, it takes away from him being able to be independent, him being able to go out on his own, because he's at that age, like even like when we were growing, like he's at that age where they like to go hang out, they like to go do these things, and it's like I don't even really allow for him to do any of that, really based upon the fear that I have that something's going to happen to him, you know and it sucks. But I also know that he's growing, and I feel like I've done a pretty good job in raising him, and him knowing, right from wrong, him understanding, what he's to do in certain situations. That's something that I'm still teaching him now. Um, but he's eventually going to have to go out there on his own. He's going to want to hang out with his friends. He's going to want to go out to a movie. He's going to want to do these things. And I can't sit back and allow for fear to keep, motivating me to make these decisions about what he can and cannot do, right? Um, all I can do is hope and pray, that nothing does happen. And like I said, that I've taught him well enough to know what to do in certain situations. So that's kind of been my story. And it's come up even more now because he's a teenager. And my son, the goofiest thing ever. But, as he's growing, he's pointing out to me, look, I got a mustache, or, I'm so tall, which he is. He's pretty tall. He's getting up there. He would like to think that he's almost 6 foot, but I'm just like, he probably does stand about a good 5'10", maybe 5'11". He's pushing it, tall thing, and he still got some growing to do, because y'all know when they teenagers, especially them boys, they be sprouting up. But I can't continue to keep allowing for fear to, ruin anything else for him, right? But also for me, that mental peace, that all of it. It's just, I never knew that it was going to be this difficult. I think I was still naive into thinking that things would be different in society. And to see the way the world is right now, all I can do is pray, right? That's all I can do. And look for other ways to teach him, to shape him, to mold him, and remember to not do it based out of fear. So that's where I'm at now in this stage and game of life with him. Um, it's a shame that the world would never, see him the way that I do. And it's a shame that the world will never get to see many of us because they're never going to give us a chance. It's a shame that it's that way. Um, and it is what it is at this point. I'm not out here to change people's minds or anything like that. But what I do know is that God has given each and every one of us the opportunity to breathe breath in our bodies, regardless of our skin color. And we are given that right by Him. And we should be able to live freely by that. And, you know, I'm just going to, continue to pray, that God keeps him safe, that he does lead Cameron down the right, pathways and to making the right decisions in life. Um, and this conversation isn't over. That's just my truths of what I'm experiencing and what I've gone through and what I am going through. Um, you know, Next week I'm going to be bringing on some other mothers to come on to speak about their experiences and the challenges that they've had, and if they've had any fear in raising their sons, and things like that. Just so I can even see, maybe I can learn from them, maybe they can learn from, my own story. But that is where we're at currently. The fear wasn't so strong when he was younger, but the fear definitely has come back a lot more now that he's a teenager. And I'm just navigating this world. On one hand, you're navigating his normal teenage boy struggles, right? Because God knows I do not know anything. And as much as I would love to pretend like I do, I have not a clue what you males go through. What y'all, I don't know none of it, okay? But I am glad that I do have the relationship that I do with my kids. But at the same time, sometimes I think he tells me a little bit too much sometimes. And I just be like, I don't got the answers for you. Okay, I don't. Um, so, navigating that piece, right? Navigating that piece. Now I got to navigate the racist people, society, the way they look at us. If we sneeze wrong, they might say something. You know what I mean? Like, I got to worry about that and this. That's double. So, just to kind of, take some weight off of all of us all the way around, that's when I just got really connected with God, and just, I put my faith, my trust in him, that he's going to keep us protected, and that he'll be able to not only guide me into how to raise my son, but also guiding my son in how he needs to show up in this world. And you know that's really it in a nutshell from my perspective on raising a young black male in this world who clearly does not see him the way that I do. And the one thing that I definitely want him to understand is that he is heard, he is seen, he is understood, and that he's not a threat, you know. But I would definitely invite you guys back next week to come in to join us here at the Blueprint Lounge with my other guests who are going to give you their stories. Okay. And this is just the beginning, guys. Definitely have more outlined episodes coming out for you guys, and I hope you enjoy it. Definitely don't forget to subscribe, here on YouTube, but also on Spotify. Subscribe, check me out, listen in, give me your feedback, be honest. Let me know what you want to hear. but I'm here to give you some very raw, intimate, unfiltered conversations as I walk my path and becoming the woman that God has seen for me. And then also just coming through and, speaking my truths from different multitudes of life paths that I've walked, and hoping that it'll help, someone, out here. So until next time, guys, I will say bye, and that I love you guys. And just remember how amazing you are. And remember to be great and be a good human. Okay? Love you guys. Bye.